Welcome to the last week of the course. In today's video, we will focus on the international instruments that protect rights of the older woman. We will start with international human rights, then move to the European level and learn what legal instruments exist in the European Union. And by the end of today's session, we will have a closer look at some particular cases based on the examples of selected European states. We will analyze and compare how these legal regulations work in Estonia, Greece and Finland, which are some of the countries featured in the SOA project analytical report on abuse of elderly women. But first of all, we will have to answer the question, what are human rights? Human rights are rights inherent to all human beings, regardless of their race, sex, nationality, ethnicity, language, religion, or any other status. Human rights are not a reward for good behavior. They are not country-specific or particular to a certain era or social group. They are the inalienable entitlements of all people, at all times and in all places. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights is the most important international human rights instrument. It was adopted by the General Assembly of the United Nations on the 10th of December 1948 in response to the atrocities and horrors of the two world wars. The Universal Declaration is not legally binding, but it has a huge impact on national legislations worldwide since its adoption. The core idea of the document is set out in the Article 1, which states that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. The rights included in the Declaration are the right to life, liberty, due process, ownership of property, education, political participation, work and leisure, etc. The Declaration also promotes non-discrimination and equality by stating that everyone is entitled to all the rights and freedoms set forth in this Declaration, without distinction of any kind, such as race, color, sex, language, religion, political or other opinion, national or social origin, property, birth, or other status. At the same time, violence against older people is a form of violation of human rights. While the Universal Declaration of Human Rights applies to all persons, age is not listed explicitly as a reason why someone should not be discriminated. For years, older people's organizations all over the world have been promoting the need to protect the rights of older persons. They were looking for solutions to deal with ageism and other forms of discrimination. In 1991, the United Nations published Principles for Older Persons that are recommended for all governments, as the United Nations suggests incorporating those principles into their national legislation and programs. According to the principles, older people have the right to independence, which means that older persons should have access to adequate food, water, shelter, clothing and healthcare through the provision of income, family and community support and self-help. Have the opportunity to work or to have access to other income generating opportunities. Be able to participate in determining when and at what pace they stop working. Have access to appropriate educational and training programs. Be able to live in environments which are safe and adaptable to personal preferences and changing capacities. Be able to reside at home for as long as possible. Older people have right to participation, as they should be able to remain integrated in society, participate actively in the formulation and implementation of policies that directly affect their well-being, and share their knowledge and skills with younger generations. Be able to seek and develop opportunities for services to the community and to serve as volunteers in positions appropriate to their interests and capabilities. Be able to form movements or associations of older persons. They have also a right to care, as older persons should benefit from family and community care and protection in accordance with each society's system of cultural values. Have access to health care to help them to maintain or regain the optimum level of physical, mental, and emotional well-being, and to prevent or delay the beginning of illnesses. Have access to social and legal services to enhance their autonomy, protection, and care. Be able to use appropriate levels of institutional care, providing protection, rehabilitation, and social and mental stimulation in a humane and secure environment. Be able to enjoy human rights and fundamental freedoms when residing in any shelter, care, or treatment facility, including full respect for their dignity, beliefs, needs, and privacy, and for the right to make decisions about their care and the quality of their lives. Older persons have a right to self-fulfillment. They should be able to pursue opportunities for the full development of their potential and have access to educational, cultural, spiritual, and recreational resources of society. Dignity is another important right, as older persons should be able to live in dignity and security and be free of exploitation and physical or mental abuse, and be treated fairly regardless of age, gender, racial or ethnic background, disability or other status, and be valued independently of their economic contribution. At the EU level, the most important human rights instrument is the European Convention on Human Rights. It entered into force in 1953 and established the European Court of Human Rights. All new member states are expected to ratify the convention at their earliest convenience. According to the European Convention on Human Rights, all citizens of the European Union have right to life, prohibition of torture and ill treatment, prohibition of slavery, servitude, or forced or compulsory labor, right to liberty and security, right to a fair trial, no punishment without law, right to respect for private and family life, freedom of thought, conscience, and religion, freedom of expression, freedom of assembly and association, right to marry, right to an effective remedy, prohibition of discrimination in the enjoyment of convention rights, protection of private property, right to education, right to free elections. Furthermore, in 2014, the Council of Europe adopted a recommendation focusing specifically on the rights of older persons. Although it is not legally binding, member states are now politically committed to invest more into the rights of elderly. This recommendation highlighted older people's right to care for the first time. It has also stressed the need to prevent and address elder abuse, while emphasizing the role of informal carers and the responsibility of states to provide adequate support for them. It also addressed the areas of non-discrimination, autonomy and participation, and administration of justice. In 2012, the Victims' Rights Directive established standards on the rights of victims of all crimes in EU member states. The provisions of the directive developed 5 essential needs of all victims: being recognized, being treated with respect and dignity, receiving support and protection, accessing the justice system, and having the right to compensation and restoration. While the directive doesn't directly address elder abuse, it strengthens the general rights of victims and their family members to information, support, and protection. The directive has also required to specifically train officials who are likely to have a contact with victims. EU countries had to implement the provisions of the directive by 2015. However, there is still a long way to go in order to ensure that its provisions are implemented effectively. Every EU member state has national legislation that goes in line with European Convention on Human Rights and ensures protection of basic human rights. However, when it comes to the rights of elder people, only few countries have a specific law or regulation that protects elder victims of violence. For example, in Estonia, there is no specific law on elder abuse, neither a law on domestic violence. Moreover, according to the Family Law Act, children and grandchildren are obliged to take care of their parents. Insufficient availability of social services and welfare options leads to the situation when a family member is taking care of an elderly person, even if they are disabled or have special needs. Family members usually don't receive sufficient training on how to meet the older person's needs. Unfortunately, such situations very often put older persons at higher risk of becoming a victim of violence. In 2017, the Victim Support Act entered into force in Estonia. It provides the basis for state organization of victim support, including Women's Support Center service. The Act recognizes not only physical violence or criminal offenses, but also neglect, mistreatment, mental and sexual abuse. However, it does not specifically address older victims of violence. The situation is similar in Greece. There is no specific law on elder abuse. In 2006, a law aimed to prevent domestic violence entered into force, but it does not have a clear focus on the elderly. It is usually quite hard for a victim to officially report abuse, as the process is slow and expensive at the procedural level. What is more, in case of elder abuse, the perpetrator is usually a family member of the victim, which becomes an additional barrier for reporting. In Finland, for example, there is an act on supporting the functionality of older persons that mentions elder abuse as a risk factor that decreases the functionality in older age. According to the Social Welfare Act, social service providers should respond to family violence and abuse. Starting from 2016, social workers are obliged to report if elder abuse is taking place or is being suspected. Starting from 2015, all the social service organizations were obliged to create a publicly available self-monitoring plan. The plan is supposed to mention all the steps to ensure the safety of the clients in cases of danger, including abusive situations. As you can see, Even though elder abuse is direct violation of human rights, which are protected by various international legislation, the issue is still not fully addressed on the international level. Provisions that aim to promote human rights of older women are not legally binding, and it mostly depends on national legislations of the countries. We encourage you to go and do a research online on how it is being regulated in your country.